I just finished setting up a VPN. I wanted to capture my process just so I could remember it later. And I'll go ahead and start here with the hardware that I chose. I'm going to be running a lot of traffic through it, so I wanted it to be a pretty speedy machine without really getting into the server level. So I chose a NUC machine from Intel with an i7. This has turned out to be pretty responsive. It does pretty well. It's pretty much a server and a small footprint. So there's a number of choices that I could have gone with. I chose an i7. I don't think this is the one I chose, but this is simply a sample of what I could use. I then went ahead and set up Ubuntu on it. I just used the regular variety of Ubuntu, nothing special. I used the version 16. And after that, I installed Docker because I'm going to be running the VPN inside of a Docker container. So the next step was to install Docker. I used that using a guide from DigitalOcean. You can also go to Docker and they have a pretty good guide as well. And this is just something that I'm familiar with when it comes to DigitalOcean, so this is the one I used. Now, once I had done that, once I had gotten my hardware, I had installed the OS, I had installed Docker, the next step was to install a VPN. I chose OpenVPN, which can be a pretty involved installation. So this is one of the reasons why I chose Docker, so I wouldn't have to go through all of that. Now the project that I started to use, or the Docker image that I use, is this one right here. It's called Docker OpenVPN. It is widely used. I believe it has over 10 million downloads from Docker Hub. And though it looks pretty involved, if you look through it, I just went through the quick start, which meant only the grayed out boxes are the options that I entered, and though it looks like there's a lot of them, by the end of it you have even created, as you can see here in this last option where you say retrieve the client configuration with embedded certificates. Once I had done that, I copied that down from the VPN machine and made a copy for what I was going to do in my next step. Now my next step is I wanted to run all of the traffic that was behind a router through that VPN. And so I wanted to make a connection between the router and the VPN. I first tried with Netgear, and there's some open source projects that have modified the firmware on the router. That looked to be promising, but I ran into a lot of obstacles and the setup options were just way too granular. It did not allow me to simply give it a configuration file. And so ultimately I just opted for getting a new router. Now the ASUS routers run by default a VPN client. And so I ordered a ASUS router. You should go ahead, if you're going to choose something like this, you should go ahead and select something that's pretty beefy, meaning that it can handle all of the encryption that it's going to be doing. And so I went ahead and chose a pretty good one. They look like battleships, and you can see here a few of the different ones. There's a few choices here. So after I got that from Amazon, just to review what I've done, I've gotten my VPN where I'm running Ubuntu. I have installed Docker. On top of that, I installed OpenVPN. That's up and running. I have gotten my configuration files, and now I'm moving on to the router. So the next screen that you're going to see is that of my router running up and running here, and I'm going to review simply the configuration that I did. The very first step that I chose, or the very first configuration, was to confirm that IPv6 was turned off. And so if it is not, then I need to, or you need to disable it and apply. The next thing is to set up the WAN. And for that, you need to set up your basic configuration. You want it to be the settings that you see here. So your WAN connection time is automatic IP, enable WAN, yes, enable NAT, yes, and enable UPnP, yes as well. After that, I went ahead and disabled the connect to DNS server automatically. As you can see here, I set it to no, and then I set two DNS servers that are specified, the 888 8 there that you see and the 8844, both of those are DNSs from Google. Now the last thing that I did was to set up the VPN. I selected the VPN from the menu, then selected the VPN client. I just ignored the VPN server. I'm not going to be using that internally. I then added a profile, as you can see here. And on that profile, I chose OpenVPN. At this point, I simply gave it a descriptive name, anything that I wanted. I left the username and password empty. And in this point here, I chose the configuration file that I had copied from my Ubuntu server. I uploaded that, pressed OK. And at that point, I was simply able to activate it. Now, if I take a look at my IPs internally, they're all those of the VPN that I have set up externally. And all of my traffic, internet traffic behind this router is running through that external VPN. So this is simply a capture of the process of setting up the VPN. And with that, I'll wrap it up.